The spare engine that I had, case and crank were shot. The engine that came out of it, crank was shot, case is okay. But being an 05 engine, it had the sodium filled valve, so I want to use the cylinder head from the newer engine that doesn't have the sodium filled valves on this, and I've bought a pile of parts, not way more than I ever intended. We've got new head gaskets, new crankshaft and bearings and bolts, and it's a mess. But I'm going to do a little time lapse, start assembling this. We've got way too many new parts, and some of the old parts we're going to reuse too. So I'm going to put this thing together and run it around for a while, see how it does. There are some modifications I believe I talked about earlier that we're going to do before we put it back in. It's just longevity type stuff. And then after it's back in the hull with all the longevity mods done, we're going to see about upping the power a little bit. But we'll go from there. So I'm going to get some pistons put in this thing, flip it over, or well, put the pistons in, put the head on, and yeah, I don't even know. So I'm just going to start working on it. Enjoy the time lapse. So the arrow on the piston I just cleaned off. One of these sides is an arrow. Arrow goes towards the exhaust port. D for down. Yep. D is for down. Alright, here's our cylinder head. This has the updated rocker shaft and non-sodium filled valves. So I pulled the oil restrictor out of this block so that it is suitable for use with the non-restricted oiling system up top here. So we've got new bolts and new bearings. 60 foot-pounds on all these. I'd say we're ready to put our RTV around and put our bottom case on and bolt that together. And then roll it over, get our chain and timing and everything put together on the top end. So let's do that. I think today is the day. Off camera I did a lot of little fiddly things like torquing stuff and putting on just stuff. Nothing really that complicated. You can figure out how to bolt the oil pump back on. It's just put the bolts on. Pretty simple stuff. So took care of a lot of that stuff, got everything put together and torqued to spec. I think this thing is ready to go back into the hull. Obviously this is pretty intense. Everything we've done here, new bearings, new crank, a different head, changing out, removing the oil restrictor from the block so that we could use a newer head on the older block, doing the supercharger oiling upgrades. A lot of this I wanted to be more driven towards that stuff. That, you know, rebuilding an engine isn't horribly complicated. It sounds complicated, but it really isn't that bad. But the little upgrades, the things that you may need to check and change along the way, are kind of the unknowns, I guess. So anyways, without further ado, over the next hour or so, I'm going to try and get this off of here into there, put back together enough that maybe, just maybe, I can start this thing up today, because I'm dying to hear this thing run. It has never ran since I've owned it. So let's get to it, start a little time lapse and get this thing into the hull and hopefully out on the water in the next few days. Done some stuff off camera, like putting the exhaust manifold back on, hooking up some wires, just little fiddly things. And I've got a lot more little fiddly things to do, hooking up the top engine cover and putting the coolant bottle back and tidying up some of my wiring and disaster in here. But I think I'm almost ready to give this thing first start. So I've got to add oil, got to add coolant. So we're going to go ahead and do both of those and then crank it for a little bit with the spark plugs out and the throttle held so it's in flood mode, so it won't inject fuel. It will just crank over so we can get oil pressure built and get oil to all the bearings and everything so we're not firing up dry. So I'm going to put in approximately 3 quarts of oil or so, and after it's running we'll adjust as needed. We're going to give this a try again. Still, spark plugs out, oil antifreeze is in. So let's see if it'll crank over and get oil to everything. That's still a no there. Well, what's going on up here? It's not the key. Maybe this battery is no good. Maybe this one's got enough power in it for us. Okay. Third time's the charm, right? All right. Starter doesn't sound too terribly happy there. Let's check our oil level again. Kind of be over top of this wheel well. This trailer's a bit goofy. Now we're down a little low, which is good. That means we're getting oil into everything. Circulated through. So put in about another quart. Is it going to start? Let's find out. Or maybe it will. A little backfire there. Sounds pretty healthy. We're going to have to finish up some of the other little fiddly things, get this all back together, and get it out on the water and do a proper break-in. With all new stuff in the bottom end, I want to go through and run it careful and break it in and do an oil change, and then we'll find out what we got in store next for it. So there we go.